And we're back 1 year later to the day, September 1st, 2022. And September 1st, 2021 was the last episode of this podcast. I took a year break. Honestly, I didn't know how long the break was going to be. I just knew that I was taking a break from the show. And I apologize for not letting you guys know. I fell victim of what we call pod fading. Where is, that's not even a word. See, it's been so long I haven't hosted, I can't even speak anymore. But pod fading is essentially where you're doing a podcast and you just sort of fade away. You stop doing it. And I have no excuse. And I apologize, but I'm back. Back with a brand new, totally revamped PodLogic. It is the show to improve your podcast, to learn about podcasting, and to be entertained by your host, yours truly, Johnny Podcasts. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a full-time podcast producer. I do the audio engineering, video production, podcast editing, hosting, management, release, basically anything that has to do with the not hosting a podcast. So if you were hosting a podcast, but you didn't want to take the time to learn about podcast editing, you didn't want to figure out how to actually get your podcast online, you wanted video for your podcast, but you have no clue how to do any of that crap. You just know that you have a message that you want to get out there. I'm the type of person that you would work with because I'm the one that makes your podcast happen. All you have to do is sit down and figure out who you want to talk to and what you want to talk about. So going forward, this podcast is going to be going out weekly. I've got the next 10 weeks planned out for this show just to prove to you that I swear I'm committed. I'm going to be doing this. And the first topic that I want to talk about is podcasting 2.0. So this past week, I had the opportunity to attend Podcast Movement, hosted in Dallas, Texas, which is actually my backyard. So I didn't have to buy a plane ticket, didn't have to get a hotel room. I could just commute from my hometown of Fort Worth. Well, I guess my current hometown of Fort Worth. Commuting sucks, just a little sidebar. The work from home movement that has spawned out of the pandemic and the lockdowns was probably the best thing that has happened to a lot of people, because driving 30 minutes to a place, being there all day, and then driving 30 minutes home sucks ass. It is the absolute worst. Traffic, gas, just the waste of time sitting in your car. It's not for me, and I don't think it's for you either. So if you are someone that commutes to work every day, I apologize. I'm not trying to shit on you in any way, but this is all besides the point. We're here to talk about podcasting 2.0. And there's a panel at Podcast Movement hosted by none other than the Adam Curry. Have you ever heard of that name? You might have. You might recognize that name. He's had multiple appearances on Joe Rogan. He's got a very popular podcast called No Agenda. But to many, he is the first podcaster, the podfather, as it were, a name that he likes to give himself, which I think is more than earned. And you'd think that at the largest podcasting conference in the world, that the guy who made podcasting what it is today, who brought it to the mainstream, would be promoted to high heavens. He's the pioneer of the industry. He's here in person to talk about where podcasting is going in the future. And not so much. They took the route of sticking him in the back corner of the conference. No real promotion or acknowledgement. I actually didn't even know he was going to be there until I looked at the actual schedule of the conference and said, holy shit, it's Adam Curry. Where's his pen? It's over there around the corner. I got to walk a quarter mile to get to his fucking room. It's ridiculous. They stuck him in the corner like he's some schmuck slinging USB microphones. The disrespect shown to this man, the man that led to billions of dollars being pumped into an industry, is absolutely sickening. But enough of my bitching and complaining. I'm here to talk about his podcasting panel, Podcasting 2.0, which was absolute gold. Adam was there to introduce us what is known as the Podcast Index, which is, and I'm pulling a quote from the Podcast Index, a software developed focused partnership that provides tools and data to anyone who aspires to create new and exciting podcast experiences without the heavy lifting of indexing, aggregation, and data management. So essentially, their goal is to protect podcasting by decentralizing the industry. And you keep hearing this word decentralization. especially a lot over this past summer and spring with industries like cryptocurrency and Web3. And essentially, this is that for podcasting. It's going to allow independent podcasters to thrive as corporations sort of manhandle their way into this world. So you're not reliant on the Apple Podcast. You're not reliant on Spotify. But let's talk about some of the details of Podcasting 2.0. The biggest detail that I think is that you can actually throw a tip to your host without having to navigate to a third party. While you're actually listening to an episode, you can tip that host in real time. I think right now it's in Satoshis or cryptocurrency. Satoshis is essentially a piece of a Bitcoin. And even a Bitcoin is so expensive that you can only really even chip in a piece of a Bitcoin. That's how much you can own. But Curry has coined this term value for value. So you don't have to subscribe on Apple Podcasts and let Apple take a cut. You don't have to do navigate to YouTube Super Chats or have to be on YouTube and going live and get your listeners to donate there or be on Twitch or sign up to their Patreon for an extra episode a week. You can tip them in real time. So if you're listening to this podcast on one of the third-party apps that allows this sort of Podcasting 2.0 features, which there's a link to this in the episode description. If you're listening to this podcast, you could go, you know what, Johnny, that was an absolute salient point. You're a genius. How can I help you? Oh, I can tip you a little bit of cryptocurrency right here. Boom. As I'm continuing to listen to the episode. So I thought that value for value is just an incredible aspect of Podcasting 2.0. You can also do features such as a transcript read-along companion while you're listening to the podcast. So think back to those old Disney movies when they're performing a song and there's a little ball bouncing along the lyrics on the bottom of the screen. Similar to that. You can search and play highlight clips within episodes. So let's say there's an hour-long episode. I don't have the time to listen to Johnny Podcast ramble on for an hour, but I know that he's got some good content in there. Well, luckily, I can just find those clips and play them back to back to back to back, all within that podcast player. You can also comment, chat, leave messages for the host within the podcast player. And let's say that this podcast was video. You could watch the podcast on video without having to navigate to a third-party app. Or in Spotify's case, you wouldn't have to host your podcast on a garbage product like Anchor. And there's a ton more of Podcasting 2.0 that just went way over my head. And hopefully as Podcasting 2.0 evolves and becomes more mainstream, I can bring you more details on that. But if you're actually interested in hearing what Adam Curry himself thought about Podcast Movement, I would encourage you to listen to the first 30 minutes of the episode linked below of his show, No Agenda. And I'm not going to beat around the bush. He was not very impressed with Podcast Movement, and it is a very entertaining story as to why. So that was Podcasting 2.0. That was my experience at Podcast Movement. Well, I guess that wasn't really my experience at Podcast Movement, but ultimately, I thought the conference was somewhat beneficial. Negative sides of it, I've found it to be a little bit more corporate than I would like. But that's the same as any industry that finds success, aka money. But honestly, the best feature about going to Podcast Movement is really the networking that happens in hallways and waiting in lines and just hanging around booths, just meeting other podcasters, people who are passionate about this craft. And that's really the main reason why I'm back, is I'm really passionate about podcasting. So how I can combine the passion for being behind the microphone with the passion of helping others become better podcasters and helping other people get their podcasts out there. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you found some value in it. If you did, please follow the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or hopefully the third-party listening apps below. You can also check out links to my Twitter. That's where I post a lot of content daily, podcasting tips, thoughts, things like that. I also have a weekly newsletter below. You can find all of that relevant information there. But for all of you that did jump back in for this first episode back, I really appreciate it. I hope you'll continue along this journey with me. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you on the next one.